Hi, I'm Sara from sewingmastery.com, where we do tutorials on sewing machines, sergers, and embroidery machines. Plus, I have a handful of online courses to help you go beyond what your basic manual has that came with your machine. So we actually just finished filming the videos for the Husqvarna Viking Amber S100. It's a super simple, affordable serger that has a lot of my favorite features on it. And I realized that I had not done a top 10 serger troubleshooting tips video. So no matter which serger you own, these tips are going to help you if you're having serger issues. So some of these things are things even I get tripped up on. I get so excited about what I'm about ready to serge that I forget something. So by going through this list is a way for you to double check everything before you get frustrated and want to throw your serger out the window. A lot of times I do talk about quality thread. Actually, all the time I talk about quality thread. If you are not feeding your serger quality serger thread, you might be in for a bumpy road. So first off, the links below, I've got some of my favorite quality serger thread. This is not the place to skimp, but if you have problems, I want you to look at which thread you're actually using. So this particular thread I've been using lately is from Mettler. It's their Sara core line, and it is just so smooth. Yes, it's a little bit more expensive, but how many of you don't have time for serger headaches? I mean, number one, you already got 4 threads going through a machine instead of just 1. Let's not amplify the issue by using old thread or maybe not the highest quality thread. Also, if your serger has sat for a while and it hasn't been loved lately, you might benefit by having it serviced at your local sewing machine service center. They should be capable of handling any brand of serger, old or new, but just keep in mind, if it is not been running, it gets dry inside, so then you start to use it, and then parts that are meant to have lubrication are kind of metal against metal. Yes, you and I do need to clean our sergers on a regular basis. Remember, I'm not a fan of canned air. Make sure you're taking a brush and bringing it out of the serger, not pushing it in. And then there is a place to oil on each serger, right where that upper looper is going up and down inside. You'll notice it's kind of shiny, and there is a place for you to put a couple drops of oil right where the workings, where all the fluff gets kind of gathered. You kind of pull that out and out goes the oil. So it's kind of a constant battle. But you and I do need to do that kind of, you know when it gets linty, that's when you got to go ahead and clean it out. And when you do, put a couple drops of oil in it. But then put it as your annual service, get your serger in, take it in with your sewing machine, and have it serviced on a regular basis. That is going to be the key for having your serger last a lot longer than people who don't have their serger serviced on a regular basis. Now, a couple other things that are very common questions that I get. So one of the things is when you have tension discs, whether they're the ones you lay your thread in or they're dials and you're coming around them. Just like your sewing machine, you have to get your thread in those tension discs. So on some sergers, that will mean that you're almost having to floss them and bring that thread deeply and with purpose into those tensions. Some sergers, when you lift up the presser foot, those tension discs will open too. And then that will cause it to easily slip in. So thread your machine with your presser foot up, or again, just make sure that everything is in those tension discs. Because if you start adjusting tension to fix the problem, because you're probably going to have 1 or 2 that are really loopy, nothing changes. It's because the thread's not even in the tension that is getting stronger or less, depending on which way you're turning your dials. When all else fails, and you'll hear me say this over and over in our videos, is just cut your threads and thread the serger from scratch. I know that's not usually what you want to do. You're so used to tying on or pulling through. But when you clear the serger out, sometimes those problems will disappear because you're starting over. Now, on a lot of sergers, you must thread the serger in a proper order, starting with the upper looper. I always say it's the second one in from the right side. Start with your upper looper, then thread your lower looper, and then thread your needles. Needles can kind of be out of order, but when you do have a thread break, like somewhere in the middle of your project, and you are having to re-thread a looper, Sometimes when you just rethread it, it doesn't work. And that's because your needle threads are still wrapped down below in sequence. And by cutting them all off and starting over, that's like the extreme version, that is clearing them out, and you putting them in the proper order is what's solving the problem. But if you can kind of replace each thread as it would have been if it was threaded from scratch, including taking the threads from underneath the presser foot from the needle and making sure that they're not down in the throat plate, they're coming through the needles and out to the side, that is going to allow you to start that chain again and have success for going forward. So once again, if I can save you a step and not have you do the whole serger over and rethread it, that is the solution, but you could probably get it figured out how to do it without starting from scratch. Now, you notice how many guides are in the serger. I always chuckle, there's not an engineer sitting in the factory somewhere going, ooh, let's put in extra guides to make those ladies and gentlemen go crazy about threading them. They are positioned in a way for the serger to work. So if you miss one, you're going to not have probably the exact look of the stitch you're looking for. But with a lot of the sergers these days, those guides are open, so it's just easy to kind of go, ooh, I forgot that one, or it came out, and slip it back in without having to start over. But if you ever get a thread that's wrapped around a guide kind of backwards or twice, that's also going to be a problem as well. So always just kind of follow those paths if you're having any issue and see if something has come out of a guide or you missed a guide altogether. They are color-coded these days, so it makes it a lot easier. Now, here is something that I do probably about once a year when I'm using sergers a lot. I will sometimes accidentally put my thread that is going through my left needle tension in my right needle. I don't know how I do it, but on occasion I'm like, oh, I'll just thread that through that needle, and then I'm not getting the right results. Well, what is happening is on every serger, your right and left needle tension are actually different. Now, even though your tension dials might be all set to the same number or a middle line, they are different inside. I do love that they give us those numbers, because then if somebody comes and twists them, like little fingers that love to help us, I can just turn those back to normal and things will get happier there. But if this thread, the one that's my yellow here, goes into my other needle, then again, things aren't correct. And that usually happens when I'm doing like a 2-thread or a 3-thread. So I'm only having one needle in, and then I've used the wrong tension disc. So again, rethreading it would have been the solution, because I would have gone, oh, I see the problem. I'm not going through the correct tensions for the right or left needle. Now, before I go on to some of the other solutions to serger problems, I want to reference that there are additional online classes that you can take through Craftsy. I even have a serger class with Craftsy. It was one of the first ones I filmed with them, and it's called Serger Solutions Troubleshooting Techniques. So a lot of the things we're talking about, but in like a 2-hour class format. Now, the reason I'm mentioning Craftsy is because they also have project serger classes. And after you know the basics of your serger, you usually say, well, what's next? What do I use my serger for? And there are some wonderful ones that I would recommend. Angela Wolf has a great one with like quick and easy serger projects and gifts. This was one of the pillows I did from her class. It's using a rolled hem to create the look of pin tucks and then cutting out fabric. For me, I just cut out a simple pillow shape, but there are so many fun things, and she does go into even additional accessory feet that you can get for most brands of sergers to even expand your options more. For putting on pearls or beads, or putting wire in your rolled hems, or doing gathering on your serger. So there is a handful of excellent serger classes I want you to check out as well. And again, you'll find some links below for my favorite ones I hope you'll check out. One more common question we get asked all the time is that your edge of your overlock stitches look like they're just kind of hanging off the edge. And it's true. It kind of looks like the loops are beyond where the fabric ends. And a lot of people think that that is a tension issue, and it's actually not. There's a time and place for adjusting the knife, the cutting width, left or right. Now, when you adjust it too close to the needles, it cuts off more fabric. And when you cut off more fabric, what happens is there's not as much fabric to fill in that whole area where the stitches are being created. So instead of trying to adjust your tension, which will do nothing, you need to adjust the cutting width. So it doesn't change the width of the stitch, but it changes how much fabric is actually left within the stitch. And by moving it further away, it leaves more fabric to make it kind of kiss the edge of where the loopers connect along the edge. So don't be afraid to adjust the knife. You'll find that if you have thicker fabric, you need the knife to cut off a little bit more. But on your finer fabrics, you'll need to adjust your knife more away from the needles to let more fabric fill in that area. Speaking of needles, have you noticed that your needles in a serger, when they're both in, are not at the same height? The left one is always higher up than the right one. So if you are noticing that your needles are identical in the placement of the eyes, you need to find which needle is not high enough up into the top part, up at where the screw is. So do keep that in mind. I always like to double check that my left one is always higher. And one way to do that, especially if I'm going from like a wide overlock stitch to a narrow overlock stitch, what I'll do is instead of just taking the needle out and moving it over, what I'll do is leave it in, add the second one, check that the needle heights are where they're supposed to be, and then remove the first one. So it's like I always am checking before I'm switching over to the needles. So just keep that in mind. I do find that sometimes people don't get them all the way to the top, then they're not where they need to be for those loopers to connect and make that perfect chain and stitch on your fabric. Now, if you are running into where your stitches are starting to skip, okay, so like as it's coming over, like the outside needle, which would be usually the left needle if you're doing a 4-thread overlock, if you're not getting that stitch all the way over to the side and it's kind of missing, we'll call that skipping a stitch, is your fabric could be too thick for your serger. So there are different sergers and different heights that as you spend more on sergers, they have more capability of handling thicker fabrics. So if you're going through something so thick that it can't get over or can't even cut through the fabric, you're going to need to find another solution. That could be overlocking the single pieces and then sewing it, but there could be a place where you kind of overstep the height ability of your serger. Now, if you're loving your serger and you're running into that because of what you've chosen to stitch, it might be time to upgrade sergers. Don't be afraid that even though you bought a basic one to get started with, there's lots of beautiful higher end sergers that are quiet, that have amazing capabilities. Some have the air threading system that make even threading even easier yet. There's just definitely features that once you own a serger, you will then appreciate on those higher end, more expensive sergers. And one of them will be for the thickness of fabrics that you're wanting to stitch through. So remember, you quality thread, have your serger serviced on a regular basis. And if you have questions, you're welcome to leave them in the comments below, and we'd be happy to help. I hope you'll check out all of our videos that we have made as free video serger tutorials. And if you don't see a serger that's similar to yours, we'd be happy to recommend one that's very similar. I hope these tips have been helpful for you, and I wish you a wonderful, happy serging the next time you sit down at your new best friend.